calling it a plague of biblical proportions. Others, a devastating invasion. One thing is for certain though, the swarm of desert locusts currently spreading through the Horn of Africa region is the worst of its kind in 25 years for Ethiopia and Somalia, and the worst Kenya has seen in 70 years. The Food and Agriculture Organization estimates there could be billions of locusts flying through the region, with one swarm in Kenya thought to be around 2,400 square kilometers. So why has the region been hit by such a massive locust invasion this year? And what impact is it likely to have on a region still reeling from drought and floods? I'm Beatrice Marshall. Welcome to Talk Africa. Now, as governments and multinational organizations continue to track and attempt to combat the locust invasion, let's take a look at where they originated, where they have currently spread to, and some of the devastation they have left in their wake.
The current desert locust situation is extremely alarming and represents an unprecedented threat to food security and livelihoods in the Horn of Africa. The locusts are thought to have originated in Oman and Yemen, with the swarms migrating west across the Gulf of Aden into Somalia and Ethiopia. Breeding is now taking place throughout the East Africa region, with the FAO tracking mature swarms laying eggs in the Sudan-Eritrea border and also the hopper groups in northern Sudan. Desert locust swarms can average over 1,000 square kilometers in size and pack anywhere from 40 to 80 million locusts into 1 square kilometer. Each locust can eat its weight in plants each day, so a large swarm can eat about 200 million kilos of plants every day. This amount of corn would feed about 800,000 people for a year. Battling the locust invasion has proved to be a major challenge in the region due to limited resources. The UN estimates it will cost $70 million to fight the invasion in Kenya alone, and even with enough resources could take up to 6 months to eradicate. The locust invasion is further compounding serious problems in the region. 2019 was a year of extremes and climate anomalies for East Africa, a region that hosts some of the most vulnerable populations of the world. The East Africa region already faces high levels of food insecurity, with over 19 million people in crisis. According to the Food Security and Nutrition Working Group, there remains a high risk of swarms appearing in southeast South Sudan, coming from adjacent areas of northwest Kenya. There is also a risk of swarms appearing in the northeast and Uganda from adjacent areas of Kenya.
And joining me now to unpack East Africa's locust invasion, Kenneth Mwangi, a satellite data analyst from IGAD Climate Prediction and Application Center. Also joining me, Cyril Ferrand. He is the Resilience Team Leader, Eastern Africa, with the Food and Agricultural Organization. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us on Talk Africa. Let me just get a status report from both of you. And I'll start off with you, Kenneth, because we have reports of a locust upsurge beginning, and they began to emerge as early as June of 2019, starting off in Somalia and parts of Ethiopia. By December 2019, they had crossed over the border to Kenya. We understand 5 countries in the Horn and East Africa region are now affected. Paint for us the picture here. How bad is the situation?
Well, the situation is now getting serious in terms of the swarms that are being observed and the area of spread that is happening. And actually, it's now 6 countries that have had infestations that in this region. That includes Djibouti, Eritrea, Sudan, Ethiopia, Kenya, and Somalia. There are about 50 confirmed locations in terms of area locations, maybe counties, some areas smaller than counties that have been reported according to the field monitors. But you might find these might be more because sources like FAO might have more sources on the ground in terms of observation networks. So far we've received about reports of 50 localities in the different countries. And large swaths of some parts of the countries have been affected. For example, in Kenya, the area that is estimated to have been affected by the swarms when combined is the size of Rwanda and Burundi. So 2 whole countries in this region that is area of infestation. And we're having now new infestations from eggs that were laid in November and December, forming new swarms. So it's like a continuous and a ripple effect type of infestation. So that's how serious the infestation is.
What is FAO's understanding, though, Cyril, of the situation on the ground?
Yeah, I think that as Kenneth was saying, obviously the situation is alarming. 6 countries, including Sudan, plus 2 other countries on the watch mode. These are Uganda and South Sudan. So obviously the threat to South Sudan is real. I think that with the rain season that is going to come in March, April, the wind direction is going to change. It will push the locusts towards South Sudan, and obviously there will be some problem in South Sudan. The problem that we are facing at the moment is that the region is facing the biggest upsurge for decades. We are talking about the biggest number of swarms and desert locusts for 25 years in Ethiopia, 25 years in Somalia, up to 70 years in Kenya, 60 years in Uganda. So yeah, this is something that is unusual, if I may say so. So there is, and this is exacerbating a food security situation of a number of millions of people. If we take just Kenya, Somalia, and Ethiopia, we are talking about close to 12 million people who are acutely, severely food insecure due to drought situation since 2016 and then floods.
Kenneth, I want to track this a little bit more, because there are 2 issues that are being raised here. That there are new infestations, you've talked about that, and then there's also been a mention that this is the biggest upsurge in decades. We understand, though, that the locust numbers could grow by up to 500 times by June of 2020, and experts are actually predicting that if this is the case, then it could become a plague. Is that what we're looking at? Is that the emergency?
Based on the trend on how it's going, it might come to such a point if effective action is not taken. Lucky for the region, there's a lot of coordinated response led by FAO, with our organization, with AGAD also, the Desert Locust Organization. Actors are really coming out to interplay in this case to prevent such a situation. But if it was not monitored, especially areas that are breeding grounds, eggs are being laid, and if you don't find such sites and some interventions like ground spraying is done, we might just find that if the climatic conditions that are very favorable for their formation, for the hatching goes on like this, you might have new swarms coming in with the cropping season, which might be in March, April, May, and that will be a very serious situation for the region.
Cyril, 12 million people are affected. This is going to have huge implications for food insecurity in the region, a region that has particularly seen extreme weather patterns over the last few years, droughts and flooding. Does this now constitute an emergency?
As an organization, we have elevated the desert locust crisis as a corporate emergency. It's a corporate priority. We must act now. The window to act is very, very narrow, as Kenneth said. I mean, we are looking at a pest that has a life cycle of around 3 months between the moment that it lays eggs, then reach a stage where it's still walking as upper bands, and then go back flying as immature swarms, and then mature swarms that lay eggs again. So by June, we could potentially have 2 life cycles, and indeed, if each locust is laying 20 viable eggs, that's multiplying by 20, and the next generation by another 20, that's by 400 or 500. So yeah, I think that's serious. You were mentioning plague. I think it's important here to really understand what is at stake here. The region, we have to zoom out a little bit from the Horn of Africa, because the locusts are not coming from the Horn of Africa. They are moving from the Arabic Peninsula. At the moment, we have also upsurge in part of Iran, in part of India as well. So if locusts are not controlled in Iran, not controlled in India, not controlled in the Arabic Peninsula, and not controlled here, we could have a serious situation in all this corridor from India until this region.
So this is a reason from the Arab Peninsula, and of course, particularly your organization has been tracking this because you are in data and analysis. At what point did you discover that perhaps the locusts were becoming quite a crisis for the Horn of Africa region?
In August last year, we got continuous reports from Ethiopia. We coordinate a network of crop monitors, and Ethiopia is one of them, through the Ministry of Agriculture and the National Met Institution. So Ethiopia reported that now the locust invasion in their country was beyond what they were used to, because some areas of Ethiopia, in Amhara, in Tigray, that is northern Ethiopia, is not a strange phenomenon. But this time, the amounts or how they control them was no longer being effective. And they were seeing new invasions happening much larger than they could control. That's when we raised the flag as an organization to monitoring level, and we became keener in monitoring what is happening. So we inquire with countries like Eritrea what is happening, Sudan. Once it's reported in 2 or 3 countries, and we get their consent that it's now beyond levels that they can control and beyond usual condition, that's when now it becomes a regional matter to be looked at.
FAO itself has talked about the situation in Somalia and said, for instance, that aerial spraying in areas of conflict in Somalia is proving rather impossible. Some of these countries completely incapable of controlling the swarms, because you did mention that if it is not controlled from the Arab Peninsula, then we could be staring at an even bigger crisis.
Yeah. Maybe if I may just complement what Kenneth was saying on what has happened. I think that the turning point is Cyclone Pawan that reached the coast of Somalia on the 7th of December. Until then, desert locusts were in the region, but it was under control. The turning point has been really cyclone that brought more wind into the southern parts of the Horn of Africa towards Kenya, and more moisture that has also continued basically to help regenerating pastures and so on. And we see farmers have been very destabilized this year by the rainy season that started on time, then and stopped a bit in October and continued until now. We still have rain. So I think that at the end of the day, those who have planted early and harvested in December were right on time before locusts arrived, but those who have planted a bit later and we still have maize that is not formed, we can see it has been a bit of a prolonged planting season. Then obviously this one will not harvest with the presence of the locust. But then you were asking me about the capacity in the region. Obviously we have countries that have less capacity. South Sudan, Somalia in particular, these are conflict-affected crises that we are handling with humanitarian assistance for long period of time. And it's very clear that it is very complex to go and operate in these countries, because a control operation from the air is not only about having the plane, it's about having the pilot that is well trained about how to spray, but it's also having all the logistic on the ground that is allowing to guide the pilot to spray at the right place at the right time at the right altitude. So it requires ground capacity as well as, of course, aircraft, and then having the right pesticide as well. But it's a real logistic that is required. And in countries where access can be limited due to conflict, yes, it becomes very difficult to do air operation.
How much do you think it's going to cost eventually? Because the UN is asking for $70 million. How much do you think it is going to cost the various countries to to complete the exercise?
Yeah, I think that the 70 million is a preliminary and conservative figure that FAO has put together in consultation with the Desert Locust Control Organization and government authorities. Now, what is very clear is that it will depend, obviously, on the movement of the swarms, and then on the impact on livelihood. At the moment, we have been extremely conservative on livelihood protection and recovery. Now, if we are not able to control desert locusts in the generation to come at the time of cropping, the beginning of the cropping season, then it's very likely that a number of farmers, but also pastoral communities, will have no crop, no harvest, and no milk for their kids. And therefore, the cost of engaging into a livelihood recovery operation will be much greater. But I think that it's reasonable to say that in the coming few weeks we will know a little bit better. It's a crisis. The 70 million is a 6 months crisis, January to June, or to July in fact. And I think as the crisis evolves, we will be revising the figures. But it's reasonable to anticipate that from 70 million will be probably shifting above 100 million in the coming few weeks, depending again on the dynamic of the situation.
All right, gentlemen, we'll leave it there for the moment. We'll take a short break now. When we come back, we'll have more on what can be done to combat this invasion and also how we can better prepare for natural disasters. Stay with us.
Life moves pretty fast. Ideas move at the speed of sound. Technology moves at the speed of light. If you don't filter out the noise, you might miss the details. We pay attention to the details because they matter, showing you a different perspective. See the difference.
Welcome back to Talk Africa. Still with me on the program, Kenneth Mwangi and Cyril Ferrand. Before the break, we looked at how the locust crisis has evolved. Let's now take a look at the possible solutions to this and how we can put in place better disaster preparedness in the region. Kenneth, we've talked about ways of control, or briefly mentioned waste control. Take us through some of the ways that you think or your organization is putting in place to ensure that this crisis is averted.
Thank you, Beatrice. First of all, this crisis, to appreciate its background or where it's coming from, is that it's a very rare occurrence. It has not happened in the last, for Kenya, 75 years, 70 years, and the region 25 years. So what happens with such disasters that are not very repetitive, like floods and droughts, is that they are not expected as much, and there's no much preparation beyond what countries normally get and are able to control. So that is the case with these desert locusts, that they came in such swarms and magnitude that was beyond the country's budgets, individual member countries. So individual member countries, how they operate is that in every national budget, there is what they set aside for response, for control of pests and diseases. And due to, we can say climate change for us, we are not shy to say climate change is driving some of these things. And you see the countries that are very vulnerable are the ones that are having challenges in, let's say, conflict. Otherwise, countries like Kenya, nowadays you are seeing better preparedness. In terms of floods and droughts, you find government gives information early enough, and people are able to act by moving from floodplains. There's better disaster response, so there's minimal loss of lives nowadays. Come to the locust now. In the way IGAD operates is that once an emerging disaster happens, there's been call for action.
Let me take you back very briefly, Kenneth, because I want to look at the previous locust invasions here. And the last major one, even though Kenya hasn't had one in 70 years, and most of the region in about 25 years, the last major upsurge was between 2003 and 2005 in northern through to the Horn of Africa. And some statistics indicate that it actually affected 20 countries at the time. Harvest losses were estimated at $2.5 billion, and $500 million was used to control that invasion. How was it eventually controlled? Did we learn anything as a continent from that locust invasion?
I think one thing that invasion taught, reading what happened by that time, was that preparedness was important. And preparedness was important by strengthening the desert locust organization, control organization. That's one aspect that was done then. And the organization has been active, headquarters in Addis Ababa, and we have an office in Kenya. And they've been working closely with regional organizations like ourselves and FAO in terms of stocking up the necessary equipment, in terms of chemicals for response. So that's one action that came from the last invasion in the region. And we are seeing the fruits bearing that this time they are very involved in in most of the places, and they are among the organizations that are even providing aerial spraying in regions of Kenya. So that's one thing we learned from it.
Cyril, let me bring you in here because in terms of lessons learned, are you seeing a better response mechanism being put in place by the countries as a result of this? Because the locusts in the past have all been interregional, moving from country to country.
My simple answer would be yes. I think that you are right. I think the last big desert locust crisis that we faced, 2003, 2005, FAO was heavily involved, particularly in the Sahel region, and there are a number of lessons that have been learned from that time. The first lesson probably is that we have, from the very beginning, not only to look at desert locusts, but to look at people. And I think that's very important to have this in mind. We have been often first treating the problem that is controlling the locust, and then after that looking at the impact these locusts made on food security and livelihoods. Nowadays, and that's very much the direction that FAO is taking in this current crisis, and the conservative appeal that we are launching, is to say we need to go at the same time on controlling desert locusts and at the same time protecting livelihoods. Lesson number 2 is obviously the level of preparedness of countries and early warning. I mean, early warning without early action is unfortunately vain, and I think that early warning, we have progressed a lot with technologies. I think on early warning we have really, and this region in particular, with IGAD leadership, has been doing extremely well in the past decade. Let's acknowledge that. Now, the early action is always the same problem. It's always the same difficulties. How do you mobilize resources when you are confronted with multiple threats or needs to answer at the same time? And then it's not always easy to have the right anticipatory action in place. On this particular crisis, I think we are all acting on a no-regret basis, and I think it's quite important, and that's what makes the difference with previous crises, I would say. The no-regret basis is something we didn't have in the past. So I would say that that countries understood the signal a long time ago and have been acting. For those that have been most affected, Kenya and Ethiopia and Eritrea and Djibouti and Sudan, they have been acting early. The third lesson that we can learn, I think we have not gone probably enough here, is on new technologies, and I think that's something we are all at the moment contemplating and saying there are potentials there. We have not yet fully unpacked with these potentials. Name it drones or this kind of new possibilities, or even satellite images to assess damages. I think that we are going toward that direction, and I'm sure that this will be one of the big lessons from this crisis, is that we need to accelerate also the use of technology into either surveillance or potentially, and this is still to be proven, but potentially also control. We are frequently asked this question, and drones do exist, they are able to spray. Right. Why don't you use it? Well, because again, the technology on desert locust is a bit different from the use of pesticide on any other pest or diseases. So, but we are working toward this direction. That's very experimental, but we need to go this direction. Yeah.
So I do want to get to understand from IGAD, though, when we talk about exploring the use of new technology, how much is IGAD using new technology in terms of surveillance, in terms of finding, reacting to the data that is available at your disposal, and what technologies do you have at your disposal?
IGAD is very updated in terms of new technologies, and we're using a lot of satellite products in terms of satellite monitoring. By these desert locusts, you might have seen maps that are showing where vegetation has been destroyed. Those are done by satellite assessments. Previously, we focused a lot on droughts and floods. We didn't anticipate that these desert locusts will get to that level. But as we speak, we have a team that is looking at the extent, the vegetation damage, and all that can be done by satellite monitoring, and also trying to focus new areas, because what is happening is desert locusts will move to where there's food. They move with the wind, but they'll almost move in a direction where there's enough vegetation to feed on. So we're employing satellite monitoring for that, to look at the areas with lush vegetation that they might move to. Also a lot of remote sensing, earth observation, geoinformation type of technologies. And basically it's to get information, predictive information, preempt areas that they can go in and give the governments. We've given governments, like government of Kenya, has good information developed by both modelers in FAO and IGAD ourselves. And we found that the information has been almost 90% correct in terms of preempting where the locust is moving to.
Right, so I do want to get a final comment from both of you. And Cyril, let me start off with you though, because this is now an interagency plus government intervention. The United Nations is in there asking for more resources to fight the invasion. We've got FAO, we've got IGAD, we've got the African Union. Exactly who's doing what?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think on the control itself, that's very technical. So I think that it's led by government. It's technically supported by the Desert Locust Control Organization, and I think they are doing a great job in the region with the resources and means that they do have. FAO obviously has a clear mandate on supporting both the Desert Locust Control Organization and governments. So I think that these are the three organizations. IGAD is really helping and can also facilitate on when we were talking a bit earlier about cross-border operation. For example, if there is no planes who are equipped to spray in South Sudan, maybe we can borrow plane from Kenya. That just requires IGAD to facilitate also that operation, that cross-border operation between countries. So these are the four big organizations for East Africa that are involved in the control. Now, when we will come to livelihood response, livelihood protection or recovery, obviously, then we'll call upon a larger number of people and organizations who are already present in the region and who have a mandate on food security, and either they are United Nations agencies or NGOs as well. So government and the institution I mentioned are really into the control part, and then all the stakeholders involved in livelihood recovery or protection will have to come also quite quickly to protect livelihood of people, farmers and pastoralists.
Kenneth, to you, yes, I know you have a point to make there, but also worst case scenario and the best case scenario. Do you see this coming to an end before June of 2020?
Best case scenario is that the climatic conditions will be no longer favorable in terms of maybe we're expecting early rains to come, and the rains will sort of flood the areas where, not flood literally in terms of a disaster, but make the soils where the eggs have been laid too moist for the hatching. Probably we are hoping for such conditions, but if it didn't happen, we still need ground control, and that goes back to what the government efforts are doing. Government has still to work with local monitors to monitor where eggs have been laid and where hoppers will hatch. And when they hatch, as Cyril gave, there's still an option, a very cheap option of mechanical control, ground spraying, that will be very effective so that this region does not harbor swarms for the next invasion in our, they might go back to the Arab countries, but they might go as destructive swarms. So we don't want that to happen in this region. Again, as IGAD and the member countries around here, this shows the importance of cross-boundary solutions, in terms of frameworks that will enable response and control more than ever, that we have to wrap the borders in terms of disaster response and control for such disasters. Countries have to be more willing to open up borders to regional actors. That's going on very well, but this time calls for an urgent framework in that. Thank you.
All right, gentlemen, we'll leave it there for the moment, but thank you very much for your insights. That's all we have time for this week, but thank you to my guests. Kenneth Mwangi is Satellite Data Analyst at IGAD Climate Prediction and Application Center. Cyril Ferrand, a Resilience Team Leader, Eastern Africa with the FAO. And remember, we'd love to hear your feedback through our social media handles on Facebook and Twitter. And you can also catch the show on our YouTube playlist to keep the conversation going, and tune in again next week for more Talk Africa. For me, Beatrice Marshall, and the team in Nairobi, goodbye.